Morning. It's snowing out. Come on, you guys had miserable childhoods apparently. This is like the best day of the year. I text my wife, she's like, yeah, we're probably not gonna make it. The kids are in their snowsuits and they're out there and I don't know how to get them back in. I'm like, that's great, that's fantastic. I'm so delighted, it's awesome. We're doing something really cool today. We're taking our kids to their first sporting event ever. And with COVID, it's been delayed a little bit, but we're going to a Storm game. Any Storm fans? Okay, yes. That was Mike, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. And if you're new to Guelph, lots of people who moved in the middle of the pandemic and you're just kind of coming out of hiding and you're like, what's the Storm? It's our hockey team. And so that's about all I know about the Storm. I don't know who we're playing. I don't know if we're good or not. But I'm really excited. In fact, my daughter, she's like, I'm so excited to go to the Storm game tomorrow. She's like, I'm going to get all my hockey gear. I'm so excited to play. And we're like, oh, sweetheart, that's not what it means to go to a hockey game. She's like, what? It's a 4-year-old, okay? We're like, yeah, you pay money to go and sit in seats and watch other people have fun. And as you think about it, you just realize how stupid that sounds to a child, right? She's just kind of like, that look, you know that look if you're a parent and the child looks at you, like, do you have any education whatsoever? Like, how did you think that was a good idea? But anyways, we're super stoked. That's gonna be fun. And so we are continuing on our series, Unexpected Jesus. And I have a question for you. Have you ever felt like stuck? Like you don't know what to believe? You ever felt that, especially in the last few years? Ever felt like, I don't even know what's true. I don't even know who's telling the truth. It's like you go to one news channel, they're saying one thing, another news channel, another thing. You scroll through social media, people are arguing about what's true. You go see this side of the family at Thanksgiving, they're saying one thing. You go see that side of the family, they say another thing. Then you read a book and now you're the expert. Then you watch a documentary, you question your expertise, right? Like there's just this feeling of like, I don't know. And then as Jesus people, maybe you've actually had this feeling like, well, at least I can call my pastor. Maybe my pastor will know, right? Yeah. And then you kind of realize, maybe you do some research and you read, some theologians or some pastors and you're like, they're disagreeing. In fact, they're making two totally different arguments from the same Bible verse. How does this make any sense? They're on different sides of every single topic. It's like a crisis happens and you're looking to these people for some sort of guidance and you're like, I don't even know who to believe anymore, who to trust anymore, what is right, what is wrong. Like, how do I just get the information I need to live my life and make my daily decisions? If you've ever felt that way, today is an awesome day to be here because Jesus' disciples have a moment like that where they have to wrestle through, like, what do they believe on a certain issue and how will that change the trajectory of their life? And today, they actually have a little bit of a breakthrough. And there's a habit that we can glean that's 2,000 years old, more than 2,000 years old, but 2,000 years old from this story that's actually very helpful for us today. It's not a silver bullet. This is not like some guaranteed, like do this, and then everything will be clear for you. It's not that, but it's this habit, this thing that Jesus followers have done for thousands of years that has been so helpful, and I want to argue maybe most helpful to people like us living in times like now. And so if you're not a church person, not a Christian, you're exploring faith, maybe showing up here today or tuning in online is part of your quest. You're kind of like, I'm just trying to figure out what's real, what's true. You're leaving no stone unturned. And so you're like, here I am. I didn't even think I'd ever come to a church, but here I am. The neat thing about today is that this habit is actually helpful for you, even as you take time to wrestle through what you believe and the trajectory of the life that you want to live on. So that's where we're going. And if you want to follow along, if you have a Bible or a Bible app or a phone, you can just type in Luke chapter 9, verse 18, and you can follow along. We'll be reading the New International Version. And going through that. So Luke 9:18. Last week, just kind of picking up, giving you some context, Robin was teaching and she taught us the story just leading up to this, where Jesus' disciples were exhausted and they're headed for a time of rest. Remember that? And then these people show up in the desert and they're hungry and there's no drive-through nearby. And so Jesus, in that moment, does not tell them, like, you guys got to go find your own meals. He's like, let's feed them. In fact, he tells his disciples to feed them. They kind of, fall short. And so he basically feeds over 5,000 people with the equivalent of a tuna sandwich, Okay, it's amazing. Now, the reason I say that is because often, like every week, we're going just verse by verse, then what's the next verse? And often in Luke's narrative, he has certain words that tie one story to the other. And this is important, okay? Sometimes you see things like upon their return, which is like, okay, that was last week's story, and then they returned, they got into the boat, and then they arrived in this new place, or after they left, or that night, or the next day. And those words are cues that this is actually happening in order in those instances. Today's story is not like that, okay? Read 9:18. Look what it says. Once, when Jesus was praying in private, okay? So it's not like, and then after he fed the 5,000 people, he decided it was time for some prayer. Okay, we don't know when this happened, but just be aware that this story does not necessarily come on the heels of all these amazing miracles that we've just been going on. Now it's another part of the story, and it's like once. So just remember, this is removed from the miracle moments, okay? That sounds unimportant. I promise you it's important in a little bit. Okay, so with that said, let's go for it. So once, when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, okay, this is a theme in Jesus' life. Jesus is constantly going to quiet places to pray. This time it's different because he's brought his disciples along. It's like a little field trip in a different direction kind of thing. But he's regularly going somewhere private to pray. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but when you read the Gospels, when you read the stories in the life of Jesus, prayer is often right before a big reveal of some sort, a big development in the story. So spoiler alert, there's a big development about to come now that Jesus is out having some time in prayer, and we're about to discover that big development. And that's really encouraging to me because often I just feel like I just need more information. I need to work harder. I need to go. And it's almost like in this moment we realize, as you kind of see this theme picking up, that sometimes you don't need to pull an all-nighter and get more information to have an aha moment. That sometimes life with God, you don't require more hustle, but more stillness. And it's in the stillness that God speaks to you. Now, if the idea of prayer or stillness or hearing from God seems foreign to you, just hang out with us for a little while, because at Lakeside we are constantly talking about relationship with Jesus, about hearing from God, having conversation with God. That sounds crazy to some of you. Like, what do you mean? You believe that you can hear from God? Yeah, we actually believe that. And so hang out with us long enough and you'll discover how we do that and the rhythms and habits that we enact as a community to regularly be hearing from God. Now, let's go through the rest of the verse. Okay, so once when Jesus was praying in private with his disciples were with him, he asked them. So he's praying and then he asks them a question. Who do the crowds, remember, because there's constantly crowds wherever Jesus goes. They had to escape from the crowds to get here. Who do the crowds say that I am? Now that's an interesting question, except if you're reading the Bible curiously, then you should be very bothered by this because Jesus just broke the prayer meeting rules. Right? Like, is anyone else thinking back to their childhood of going to like a prayer meeting? I would go Sunday nights once a month with my parents, sit in this little circle, and the pastor would give people ideas of things they can pray for. Then they all close their eyes, bow their heads, and pray. I'm just imagining little Mark sitting in this prayer meeting, counting ceiling tiles, expertly evaluating everyone's shoes because my head was bowed and my eyes were not closed, right? And I just imagine what would happen if in the middle of this solemn prayer moment, I'm just like, hey guys, who do the crowd say that I am, right? I imagine what my mom would do. I mean, she's here now. Mom, what would you have done in that moment if I just start talking? Hey guys, who do the crowd say? I just imagine there'd be a little elbow. There'd be like a mak, right? Like it'd just be like this moment of like, you don't do that. You don't interrupt prayer with conversation. And yet Jesus takes his disciples away to a quiet place to pray and then starts a conversation. It's like, what are you doing? Are we allowed to do this? It's like, I guess so. Jesus is the one leading the prayer meeting. And he decides that there's going to be some time of question and conversation. It's like, what's going on here? And maybe this is really helpful for some of you. Because some of you, like me, grew up with this one idea of what prayer is, which is like there's the right words in the right place and the right posture, and it's kneeling beside your bed or whatever it was for you growing up. And it's like, and that's what prayer is. And if it didn't fit into that box, it wasn't real, authentic prayer. In fact, one of the things I hear often as a pastor when I'm talking to people is like, often it's like, I just don't know how to pray. I don't know what to say. And the older I've gotten and the more I've read the scriptures and the more I've journeyed down this road, I've just discovered as you read the stories of Jesus followers and God's people throughout history, prayer is so much more than this one format. That engaging with God has so many different ways that it plays out in the scriptures. Prayer is a way of retreating, of getting away to a place of quiet and stillness. Prayer is a place where you take deep breaths and you calm down away from the craziness. It's interesting to me that the Holy Spirit, one of the names, pneuma, means breath. In the Psalms, we see that prayer sometimes is about sharing your emotions unfiltered and raw. And if you've never seen raw prayers, read the book of Psalms. There's some intense ones in there. Prayer is about listening and hearing. Sometimes it's not even about saying anything. Sometimes it's about asking questions, real, honest, raw questions. At other times, like this one, it's a space of reflection. And other times, if we take cues from the disciples, prayer is an opportunity for a nap. And in the middle of the prayer meeting, Jesus brings in a time of reflection for his disciples. Jesus models that sometimes you don't need to say anything, that maybe the best way to summarize it is to be still and reflective is a powerful part of prayer. To be still and reflective is actually a powerful part of prayer. And if you've ever felt like prayer was something really hard, that seems like an easy on-ramp, doesn't it? I can be still and reflective, and you can too. So they engage in the reflection. They replied. So remember, they're having a conversation in the middle of the prayer meeting. I love this. They replied, some say John the Baptist. Now remember, John the Baptist is dead, okay? So Jesus is like, hey, who do the crowd say I am? Some think that you're John the Baptist. Like, okay, but he's dead. Okay. So others say Elijah. He's also dead, right? Still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life. It's like, Jesus, there's a lot of theories from all the people, and we hear them all. They don't tell you, but they tell us. A lot of people think you're one of the dead prophets. So they're not just theories, they're kind of conspiracy theories, right? Like they think that you came back to life, or you're one of the dead prophets, and there's lots of bets going on as to which dead prophet you are. That's really who people think that you are. They read the stories of the prophets. They think they're amazing. They see you, you're amazing. They're like, one of them's come back to life. We're not sure which, but that's basically what the people think. And then Jesus says this, but what about you, he asked. Who do you say that I am? Notice what he does here. He gives them space to think on their own. He gives them space to reflect away from the crowds in a quiet place. Can I go on a little tangent for a second? I promise it'll be helpful. Something fascinating about human nature, something that sociologists and psychologists and scientists have studied deeply. And if I could just kind of summarize all this idea into one simple, easy understand, grab it at the bottom shelf idea, it's this. Our thinking is formed by our environments. The environments that we occupy shape our thinking and play a big part in the way that we think. In fact, there was this fascinating study done in the 50s by a man named Solomon Asch, and he basically wanted to see how much are we influenced by the people around us. And so he did this really fascinating thing where he'd get groups of 8 people together, and one of them was the mark, like the chosen person, right? Like they're the ones that they're doing the experiment on, that they don't know they're having an experiment done on. And the other 7 people were actors. And so they did this survey over and over and over again, and they basically showed them a picture. We're gonna show you the picture right now, okay? So the picture was, this is the line that you want, and you have to find that line in this diagram, okay? So it's like, here's the line, pay attention to the length, and now find that same length in the diagram. Pretty simple, right? Can we do it now? On the count of 3, I want you to yell out the letter that you think this line is on this side. Does that make sense? Is this working, by the way? Yo, that's so good. Our tech team's awesome. Okay, cool. So on the count of 3, everyone know which one they think it is? Okay, 1, 2, 3. C. Good. So what he found was that 99% of people every time got it right. And then what he did was he started to have the actors start to pick the wrong answer every once in a while in unison. And he would always have the mark, the person chosen, to do the experiment on, go last. And what they discovered was the more and more people who chose the wrong answer, the person who was there, who was like all of us, just a common person who could easily see what the right answer was, would sometimes start to pick the wrong answer. And then eventually, if they had everybody else in the environment choose the wrong answer, the person that the experiment was being done on, 30+% of the time would choose the wrong answer. Our environments impact the way that we make decisions. We know this. We don't even need the scientists to tell us this. We have so much language for this. We call it peer pressure. We call it the bystander effect. We say things like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? We acknowledge that the environment that we grow up in shapes the way that we think and behave. We talk about people and we say, yeah, they think this, but remember, they went to this university, or they were on that campus for 4 years. They were like stewing in it for years, right? Like we talk about conspiracy theories and why they spread, and they're like, well, they're from that state or that province, or, like, well, why would they think that about God? Well, they're from one of those liberal churches, or they're from one of those conservative churches. We are constantly, without even realizing it, affirming what Solomon Ash pointed out about human nature, which is we are constantly, our thinking is formed by our environments. That's just a fact. It's not even a spiritual fact. It's just a fact of life. That's just a known reality. Add to it the fact that we are like the least reflective culture in the history of the world. I constantly have to tell my kids when they're going upstairs, like, press pause on your iPad while you're walking up the stairs. And then 20 minutes later, I'll be going upstairs reading the news on my phone. It's like there is virtually no space in our life where we are without devices and screens and noise. We have so little reflection where we're constantly taking in information from our environments, from our devices, by the things and the people around us and the media around us, and we have so little time to actually reflect and critique it, okay? Now, why is that interesting to me? Because Jesus takes them out of the environment to ask them these reflective questions, to a quiet place. And in a time of prayer, of solitude, of engagement with God, in this space, Jesus forces them to take time and identify and think about the ideas that surround them. Hey guys, who did the crowd say that I am? Let's just acknowledge what's going on out there. It's like, well, they think that you're a dead prophet come back to life. He's like, okay. And then he invites personal reflection about their own thoughts, that he gives them space in this quiet place to reflect and figure out what they actually believe. But what about you, he asked? Who do you say I am? And then Peter, I love Peter. Peter answered, God's Messiah. It's fascinating to me because Peter reminds me of me, right? He's always shooting from the hip. He's like, shoot first, aim later. He's always reacting. He's quick, right? It's like he's just that guy. And all of a sudden, Peter's the one that has this great aha moment. You take him out of the crowds, you take him out of the busy city, you give him a time of space and reflection. All of a sudden, he's like, you're the Messiah. You're the Messiah. He realizes Jesus' true identity. He's the only being in the whole time of Jesus' public ministry besides demons who have acknowledged this. Remember the demons? We know who you are, Jesus, the Holy One of Israel, right? But besides that, he's the only person who's actually able to identify this. His environment has changed. And when he comes to this conclusion, it's not because he's listened to a great sermon. It's not because he's done a poll of his friends and they all agree with him. It's after a time of quiet prayer and reflection. The big aha moment, as most are, is connected to a time of silence, solitude, and engagement with God and quiet reflection. Now, let me get back to that in a second, but some of you hit a speed bump about 30 seconds ago and you're a little lost. You're like, what's a Messiah? What does that even mean? So let me just give you a little history lesson to help you understand that. So if you read the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, God had a people group. They were his people, the Israelite people. They were a chosen people. They were a blessed people above all the other people. Some of you are like, that sounds very prejudicial of God to choose one people over the other. That's fair. In fact, at times, the way they behave, you kind of would believe that too. But the thing that we often miss, but it is all throughout the scriptures, it is all throughout God speaking to his chosen people, is they aren't just blessed. He uses this phrase, you're blessed to be a blessing. So it's not favoritism, it's pragmatism. It's kind of like if I pick one of my kids and say, hey, here's some cake, give it to all the other kids. It's not favoritism, it's pragmatism, right? And so God's like, I have blessed you, I will bless you, and you are to be a blessing to all the other nations. So this is what God's chosen people were. And where the Messiah comes in is these people didn't have it easy. The Israelites went through many hard times. They went through slavery for hundreds of years, captivity, oppression. They're currently under Roman rule. They pay taxes to the oppressive regime that is Rome. They have soldiers patrolling their territory all the time, and so they don't feel all that blessed. But God had promised for hundreds of years to one day send a savior, a Messiah, someone who would come to rescue them. So that's where it comes in, okay? So they've been waiting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years for someone to rescue them from the state of being that they find themselves in, okay? Everyone's waiting for the Messiah to come for hundreds of years. The Messiah to Jews, this is gonna help you remember it, is kind of like the Stanley Cup to Toronto Maple Leaf fans, okay? You're not sure if you're gonna see it in your lifetime, but it might come soon. The neat thing is we have access to Jewish historical writings, Jewish history, and when we read that, we actually understand why this was such a big deal to Peter and the other disciples, is that the image of the Messiah was to be, the popular idea was it was gonna be a political ruler, a military giant, a punisher, someone to bring vengeance, basically a strong man. And then you got Peter saying, Jesus, you're the Messiah. It's like, that doesn't really fit. Doesn't really fit the bill. He's nice to the weaker civilians in town. He teaches nonviolence. He encourages people to pay their taxes. So there's no real evidence, at least culturally, what they were expecting, that Jesus would be the Messiah. Now, people often point to the miracles. They're like, yeah, but remember all the miracles that Jesus did. That's what led him to believe that he's the Messiah. And miracles are the thing that will get people to believe. I'm just like, hang on a second. Remember when we said it was really important that this story is not actually tied to all the miracles? It just says once upon a time, in a sense, Jesus took his disciples. So that doesn't work. And the second thing is, this is really interesting, nowhere in the Hebrew scriptures does it ever tie the Messiah being painted as a miracle worker. That's actually not one of the images that's given. So for people to be like, well, it was evident from all the miracles, like that wasn't one of the categories they had. Like, look at all the miracles, it must be the Messiah. That just didn't exist. Tradition required a political power, a military leader, a punisher to show up. So then how did Peter figure it out? I love the way Joel Green summarizes it. He says, the revelation that Jesus is Messiah is supernaturally mediated. It's from his time in prayer that God revealed it. In fact, this story is also recorded in the book of Matthew, and we get a little bit more in the details of that story. Jesus is actually saying in response to him being called the Messiah, he says, this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood. Nobody told you about this. This wasn't a rumor that you picked up and dug down on Google and understood more, right? It's like, this wasn't revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. It's supernaturally mediated. He discovered it in a way that you could not have on earth. Think of how crazy this is, that Peter's actually aware nobody else has come to this conclusion yet except a demon. How did he get here? Our thinking is formed by our environments. The environment that he was brought into by Jesus was conducive to hearing from God, a place that he was present with God, a quiet, reflective space, away from the conspiracy-riddled crowds, away from family pressure. Peter's thinking, the bottom line is Peter's thinking is formed by his time in prayer. Now let's keep going and we'll come back to that at the end, okay? Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. Didn't we already go over this? Remember Jesus was like, go and tell everyone what God has done. Don't tell anyone. Go and tell, it's like, which is it, Jesus? Are we supposed to tell people about you or not? But this is different. Jesus doesn't say, don't tell them all the things I've done. He just says, don't tell them about this identity piece, right? Don't tell them that I'm the Messiah. You can't tell them that. Why is it that Jesus wants to keep that a secret? We'll cover that in a minute. But the next part that Jesus says, it's a bit of a mouthful, but this is key. And he said, the Son of Man, this is one of the ways he referred to himself, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. Basically, I must be rejected by the entire religious establishment and on the third day be raised to life. Okay, let's go back to the first part of that because that was really intense. Verse 22, okay? Just right in the beginning there, he says, I must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law. Lots going on here. Let me unpack it for you. Number one, the Messiah, the king, the military giant, the punisher, is gonna get killed. Wait, what? Jesus, you mean you're gonna kill some people? You're taking names? Is that what you're gonna do? It's like, no, I'm gonna die. It's like, okay, we got a problem, right? Like no political leader in their campaign and their 3 promises and all their deliverables says, and by the way, then in 3 months, I'm gonna die, I promise, right? It's like, that's not a great campaign for ruler, right? Like, Jesus, seriously? Like, no, what's going on here? But he's just like, I'm gonna die, point 1. Make that in your notebooks. And then secondly, the experts of religion, the holders of the sacred text, the rule enforcers for religious piety, those who we would think would be the most qualified to certify the Messiah, are actually going to reject him. Take a second and just kind of try to get where they were at. Make a mental list of all the pastors that you know, whether online or you listen to their podcast or whatever. Pastors that you trust, that you think, I like them. I think they're trustworthy, okay? Just make a list. Some of you, it's a very short list. Some of you don't have anyone on that list right now. Others of you, it's a long list. But just take a moment and make a mental list of any spiritual people that you're like, I trust those people. It's like Jesus now showing up and saying, I'm gonna do something. And they, the people on your list, are gonna miss it. In fact, they're gonna reject me and try and kill me. Just imagine the emotional weight of that moment where it's like, but these are the people we've trusted who've always done this. This is what they look like it, like they wear the religious outfits and they got the text and they memorized all the things. And Jesus is like, yeah, they're gonna miss it. But they've been talking about the Messiah and they teach the Messiah. In fact, we just heard a sermon last week about the Messiah coming and all this stuff. And it's like, yep, they're gonna miss it. They're not gonna understand. Jesus is saying this, I know what popular opinion is. It's that there's some sort of warrior who's gonna show up and kick butt and maybe storm the Capitol while he's at it. And Jesus corrects this warrior God idea. And he says, following me is not gonna end in power and privilege, but in death. And if you feel confused at this moment, the text doesn't resolve it. And the disciples aren't given an answer, right? And it's like, can we talk about the death of Jesus? Not yet, because it's not where Jesus goes. In fact, the only thing he does with it is he's like, I'm gonna die, and you can't tell anyone that I'm the Messiah. It's like, well, what's going on here? And so we'll continue to unpack that. In fact, we're gonna stop just after this verse because there's just so much even just getting to this point that I wanna unpack for us today. But just pay attention to the fact that Jesus kind of leaves them on a cliffhanger. It's like, I'm gonna die, don't tell anyone else. Basically, he lets his disciples in on an idea. Friends, this is what he's saying to his disciples. You have no idea what's to come. You definitely don't understand it. So just keep your mouths shut and keep listening. You ever heard the saying, I have just enough information to be dangerous? That's what the disciples were in this moment. It's like, we know he's the Messiah, but we don't really understand what a Messiah is anymore. We're all lost. Apparently he's gonna die. We don't get that. This is just like, well, just keep listening, keep journeying. This is like a turning in a sense in the book where now we learn about discipleship and following Jesus. And so they just continue to follow him and learn and ask questions and all that. Jesus needs to reform their idea of what the Messiah is, what greatness in God's economy is like. And if his goal is death and people find out he's the Messiah, nobody's gonna let him get to that end. We don't let our leaders die, not the ones that we like, that we expect to save us. We want them protected at all costs. So he gives them enough information to keep them paying attention. So let's just pause here for a second. And we're gonna split the text. So next week, we'll then pick up the part where then there's application. That's the whole, then you pick up your cross. We're gonna unpack that next week. We're gonna give more time for that. But today what I wanna do is I just wanna go back and focus and reflect on the way in which this information came to Peter. Because I think so often, because the rest of this text is so powerful, we miss and we don't ever sit with the reality of something supernatural that just happened, that can actually happen in our lives as well. You see, I don't think they ever would have had this aha moment if they were never put in this amazing environment where they can be away from distraction and be present with God. The disciples were shaped by their environment. And here's the question I would love for us to reflect on. What environments are shaping you? What environments are shaping you, whether you realize it or not? What environments are shaping you? Can I share a story with you? I think I shared it a few years ago, but you maybe didn't remember it or weren't here a few years ago, and I think it's helpful. A few years ago, my wife and I were watching a show together. It sounds very mundane, like married people would do all the time, but that's very rare for us because we never find shows that we like, because some of you are like that, right? So the last show we watched together, the only show we ever watched from beginning to end was The West Wing. Remember that? Any West Wing fans? Yeah, okay. Leo McGarry. Okay, when you're praying, pray for a Leo McGarry who loves Jesus to be our exec pastor, okay? That'll help you. All right. So anyways, so we found another show that we liked together. It was this great show. We really liked it and all that. And so we're watching it. We're kind of binge watching it because it's so rare for us to actually kind of sit and cuddle on the couch and actually watch a show together. And so we're watching this show and we're loving it. And one of the subplots, it's like there's like a great crime show or whatever, but there's like always like a relational subplot. This detective's in love with that, whatever it is, right? And so there's a subplot and it's all relational and all this stuff. But one of the interesting factors is that many of the people, if not all the people, are having affairs, okay? So anyways, we're watching the show. It's not an explicit show, but you have this idea that that these people are all having affairs. And so anyways, I just kind of get to this realization. I don't know if it was a couple weeks later or a month later or whatever, but I just kind of chat with one of my friends. I'm like, you know what? I really want to have an affair. I don't know why, but I just have this idea. And as we kind of process it, I'm like, oh yeah, I've been sitting in this environment where this idea is just celebrated. It's just present all the time. All of a sudden, I'm happily married. I love my wife. We're like best friends. This is never ending sleepover, my best friend. It's fantastic. And all of a sudden, I have this idea. I'm like, I think an affair would be fun. And it's funny because I'm a pastor. If anyone should know how terrible marriages go when people have affairs, I'm aware. I see those stories. I know those stories. I've walked with people in those stories. And yet somehow, this environment is brought in this place where I'm like, that might be an interesting idea. I wonder what that'd be like, right? So eventually I just like, hey, I did not watch this show. Somehow I just want to have an affair, right? We just, had an honest conversation about it. And we just ended it. But just realized our environments are constantly shaping us all the time. What's forming you, intentionally or unintentionally? I love the way John Mark Comer summarizes it. He says this: what you give your attention to is the person you become. All of a sudden it was making sense how I ended up in this place. Put another way, the mind is the portal to the soul. And what you fill your mind with will shape the trajectory of your character. In the end, your life is no more than the sum of what you gave your attention to. Here's why this matters so much. At whatever age you find yourself, we are being formed by the spaces and the environments and the people that surround us all the time. The shows that we watch, the coworkers we hang out with, the peers that we have in school, the music, the social media, the news. These environments are negatively or positively shaping us, often without even realizing it. Shaping our views of marriage, of divorce, of power and authority, of when forgiveness is appropriate or inappropriate, of parenting, of sexuality, of how we care for the poor, how we deal with wealth and possessions. And often we don't even realize that we're being shaped by it. Anyone else realize that the same decade that gave rise to the Me Too movement, which I'm so grateful for, was also the decade that gave rise to the trilogy of the 50 Shades of Grey series? You ever just pause and just think about the things that we are constantly surrounded by in our environments and how they're shaping us as individuals and as a culture? It's not surprising when I think about this, the number of times I've sat with people in my office as a pastor and we're talking about things and they have this idea for the major area of their life. And I just say, Jesus actually didn't say that or said something different, or that was Kanye, or that was the president, or that's, from the Constitution or from our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but that's actually not a Jesus thing, just so you know, right? It's like, really? I thought that was Jesus. It's amazing to me, right? It's like we are constantly shaped by the environments that are around us, and yet we're invited to be shaped by Jesus. I love the way Rich Villadas just says it so good. And if ever you wanted a good follow on social media, Pastor Rich Villadas is a Jedi. Just every day, just blows my mind. He says this: the troubling reality is that believers can be deeply committed to being Christian without ever being deeply formed by Christ. You love Jesus, but cable TV is shaping you. You love Jesus, but the musicians in your life are shaping you. You love Jesus, but your family is shaping you. That sounds counterintuitive, right? Isn't our family supposed to? Absolutely. But there are things about the family system that you grew up in that are not the Jesus way. I love the way Pete Scazzaro summarizes it. He says, you have Jesus in your heart, but grandpa in your bones, right? It's just and then you're just gonna continue to do what your family always did, even though you've heard and committed to doing it the way Jesus invites you to do it. We are constantly being shaped. So here's what I wanna do as a takeaway for today. I wonder if at the beginning of Advent, this is the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas, to the coming of the Messiah, if maybe this is an invitation, like Peter, in the midst of all the chaos, to be removed from it to create quiet spaces of reflection in our life. I wonder if I could just give it to you in 3 words. Here's a sentence. If you write this down, this sentence will help you remember how to kind of enact this in your life. But life change starts in quiet reflection with Jesus. So highlight quiet reflection and Jesus. That this was key in the midst of all the chaos, all the conspiracy theories, for Peter to have an epic realization from heaven and then now know how to live his life in response to it. Quiet, reflection, Jesus. Let me just give you these 3 things. And maybe now, as we're coming out of the pandemic, refining our habits and our, routines and all that, maybe this is the time to begin this as we lead up to the chaos of Christmas, to have these times of retreat so we can daily be listening to God. So here it is. Number 1, quiet. Some of you, step 1, you've been locked down, you've been with kids, you've been working from home, you've had devices, you've had no distance between what is, family time and work time, and it's all happening in the same room or rooms, right? And so first of all, some of you need a place and space where you can get quiet. A place with no phones, no screens. If you're a person like me, you need a tidy room with no chores to be done or things to be fixed or clean. If you're parents, maybe you give each other opportunities to tap out and to go on a reflective walk or to be alone in a different part of the apartment or condo. If you have a roommate, maybe this is something you can encourage and challenge each other to find spaces and times where you're away from devices and you're just still. So that's the quiet piece. Then there's the reflection piece. This is a critical spiritual practice. All throughout the scriptures, over and over again, a word that keeps coming up, God is saying, remember. There's something so spiritual about just taking stock of what has happened, what God has done, and what you've been experiencing, and even what you've been taking in your life, the ways that you've been maybe unintentionally informed. You may do that through journaling, through talking it out, for going on a walk, looking back on the things you've done, you are doing, you're thinking of doing, the things you're involved in, and reflecting on how this is forming you. And then finally, welcome Jesus into it. If that sounds like a foreign idea, you're like, I don't even know Jesus, I'm new to Jesus following, I want to try this out, but I'm just new. I just say grab one of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're 4 accounts of the life of Jesus. As one scripture author wrote, Jesus is the exact representation of God. If you want to know what God is like, start looking at Jesus. Maybe just start reading one of those. Just start, just experiencing God in that way. The other thing as Jesus followers is we believe the Spirit of Jesus actually resides in us. If you've surrendered your life and welcomed him to live in your life, the Spirit is actually in you. That means going somewhere quiet and being reflective and allowing different thoughts to come to your mind. Often just those thoughts that come to your mind are actually a gift from Jesus. That often we're waiting for this audible voice to come out of nowhere, but often it's just the thoughts that bubble up in the quiet place that are actually from Christ. Because remember, his Spirit lives in us. And then if you're not sure, is that from Jesus or is that just, breakfast? You just go back to scripture. It's does this look like Jesus? Does this sound like Jesus? We have Jesus documented by 4 different biographers. It's such a gift. And so welcome in that quiet place, welcome the presence of Jesus to speak to the different things you've been formed by and the things that you will be doing. Invite him to have a voice in that. I'm gonna invite Randy to come up now. One of the things I love doing in my quiet time is I actually have instrumental music playing. It's just something that helps me calm down and be present in the moment. It creates space, and a space that often is, littered with kids or work or whatever. It just changes the environment a bit. And so I've asked Randy just to give us a minute or two to be still and to actually practice this right here and right now. And maybe there's 2 questions that you could ask yourself. Number 1, Jesus, is there something that is forming me, intentionally or unintentionally, that you want me to be aware of and maybe even eliminate? So is there something negative that's forming me to eliminate? And secondly, is there a space for quiet reflection that I could add to my week? Might be a 5, 10, 15, 20-minute window in a certain location, whatever it is, after a daily ritual or rhythm that you already have in your life. Just let Jesus bring that thought to mind. And I always say, write it down and discuss it with family or friends at lunch. But let's just be still and welcome the Spirit of God to reveal some of the ways we're being formed and the ways we can be formed. As you head out, friends, there's no rush to leave the room. Kind of leave this space and some music playing if you want to be still, if you want to journal. Our prayer teams are up at the crosses. You can always go for prayer. If you're watching online, you're welcome to hit the prayer tab. And if you're in the chapel, Brian is happy to pray with you as well. Can I just bless you with this? Mike started off by praying that God is never changing. And some of you, COVID just knocked you off your rhythm and you had deep times of intimacy with Jesus and you just feel like you've lost that rhythm. And so today I just bless you to remember that God has not changed. Those amazing times of intimacy and hearing God's voice that you've had in the past, God wants to have those going forward. He wants to continue to grow his relationship with you, wants to continue to form you into the person he's created you to be. Have a fantastic week, friends. I'm heading downtown, so pardon me as I sneak out the back door and try and beat the crowd.